Okay, our panelists today are Martina Maloney, who's the first speaker this morning, Bernie O'Donoghue-Hines, who's from the LGMA, Patrick Malone, who has just been speaking from the LGMA as well, Colin Flood, who was speaking earlier on from the Secretariat, waving. And if there's any gaps in those questions, I will try and field them myself. And if we can't field any questions, we'll note the questions and we'll field answers as well. And I suppose the other thing as well is we will try and construct a Q&A out of this. So we'll try and maintain some record and we'll post material on the website. But if you have any further questions, as Colin says, please email them into us and we'll try and make sure we get an answer back to yourselves. That's what we're here for, and that's what we'll try and seek to do for yourselves. So just to kick off the Q&A, I might ask Martina, I suppose the first question is the big elephant in the room for 2020, which is also continuing on into 2021, is COVID-19. And in terms of, would you have any advice for local authorities? And would you have any sense as to maybe how NOAC might be thinking in terms of reporting on that, in terms of dealing with COVID-19 and the impact it has had on local authorities and local authority services? Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Colin and Patrick for their very informative presentations. It just goes to prove the amount of work that goes into the publication of the Performance Indicators report, and that doesn't even capture all the work that goes on at local authority level and in the other agencies. Just to respond to John's question, I suppose this is something that the Performance Indicator subgroup discussed earlier on this year, because obviously we realised that we can't just dive into doing the same thing we did last year in terms of the publication of the report. So Colin and Neil prepared a report for us in terms of the indicators that were particularly impacted by the COVID restrictions. So I suppose our attitude to it in NOAC is that there'll be a significant context note with the indicators report this year, recognising the disruption that was caused to local authority services, the changes in arrangements, the delivery of additional services, the impact, for instance, on rate collection, where rates were suspended in certain instances and the government supported the local authorities by replacing that amount, the impact on collection accounts generally. So we're aware of it. We've also asked maybe that we would get an input from the CCMA and LGMA in relation to that to give us a good grounding in terms of how COVID has impacted, so that the report that will be published will be looked at in the context of being in the middle of a pandemic and how agile local authorities have been in terms of adapting to the revised scenario. But some of the issues reflected in the performance indicators are bread and butter issues that still continue. If I look at the road maintenance side of it, which is so important, for instance, that will still continue. The fire service still continues. So there's quite a lot of services that are still ongoing. And we did discuss whether, you know, on a blip year like this, how we would handle it. But our sense is, for trend analysis and even to understand the impact COVID has had, that it's worth publishing it. And what we would do is ask local authorities, if there are issues that they want to bring to our attention specifically, that they would do that in the context of the notes function that's on the LG returns.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. If any of the other panelists wish to add to that or otherwise I'll move on. I've a number of questions here and I'll pick them up as people send them in. Yes,
Sorry,
Bernie,
John,
yes.
I might just come in there before you move on.
Yes, no problem at all.
No problem.
Yes.
It's just in relation to data around what was going on during COVID, that we do have a lot of data centrally that we will be supplying to NOAC in relation to that. We have stats in relation to the community call. We're looking at setting up a data collection piece around Keep Well. And we've conducted research ourselves and gathered case studies, and we've worked with the IPA to gather a second selection set of case studies, and they're just completing a piece of research for us at the moment where they've gone out into the sector and done qualitative research as well as the quantitative piece. So we will have a lot of data centrally that will be able to provide to NOAC, to provide that big wide context, as well as the individual feedback from the local authorities. So just the people are aware that we'll have more than just the individual feedback.
Okay, thank you very much. That's appreciated. And I suppose just to emphasize as well from our point of view that when local authorities are making returns, and if they see that there is a significant difference in the returns for 2020 as opposed to the previous years, and they feel, particularly because it's of some COVID impact, it would be worth to add a bit of a narrative, and that would very much help with the reporting, and it would also allow NOAC to fairly reflect what is happening across the sector. Just to say that as well. So thank you very much. Next question, actually, I'm going to field it to yourself, Bernie, if that's okay. And I probably might need to help myself, but one question is in relation to the census. As Dee Murphy has asked the question, in relation to the 2016 census figures, is there any provision in LG return system to take account of the LG Act 2019, as in the Cork City boundary expansion, and the increase in population for Cork City, and the commensurate decrease in population for Cork County? Is that a question you could take there, Bernie?
Well, I suppose that was dealt with last year, because that actually came up in 2019, and Niall had engaged in quite a lot of conversations between the two local authorities to iron that one out. So whatever was agreed in 2019 will carry forward to 2020, because one of the things we need when we're looking at trend reports is consistency. So whatever was decided last year will carry forward to this year, and it's really when the next set of census figures comes in, that's when we're back on track. But until then, whatever's decided, we lock into for consistency so that we can actually undertake trend reports and compare year on year.
Okay, that's very much appreciated. And I suppose just to note as well, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the estimated populations for Cork City and Cork County are estimated based on data from the 2016 census, not data or estimates as to now. It's dated back to 2016 to be consistent that the population data across the reporting is based at that stage. Is that a fair comment?
I'm not sure now what was agreed between Cork and NOAC, so I don't know, maybe if Colin would have a stronger idea, or else we can get back to people, because that was decided between Neil and the Cork counties and city. Okay,
all right. Thanks very much, Barry. The next question actually is between Colin and Patrick. Thanking you both for excellent presentations from B Daily. And I suppose two questions. When will the new updated guidelines be circulated to local authorities? And will staff be informed of the same? And also, when will LG Returns website become live? That's a question there was put out again. So maybe the first part to Colin and the second part to Patrick, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, the updated guidelines were shared along with the link for this webinar, but for absolute ease, we'll send it to all attendees following this webinar, and then they can be shared out among the staff. We'll then post them on the NOAC website as well. They'll be the updated ones. So yeah, we'll share them as soon as this webinar is over with all the email addresses that we gathered for this webinar.
Thank you very much. Patrick, do you want to add in your bit, please? Thank you.
Sure. The LG return system, as Colin mentioned earlier, we're just doing the updates with the guidelines on the system, and we're just getting that preparatory groundwork in place. But it's anticipated that the LG return system will be going live within the next 2 weeks, certainly.
Okay, that's very much appreciated. Thank you very much. The next question, actually, I'm going to field to yourself, Patrick, if that's okay. And it's from a Dave Mitchell, and he's asking, is the LG return set up from scratch with users and permission each year, or does it start from the 2019 users setup? How do you do it? And
the existing users from last year, John, they're still in place. But as I mentioned in the presentation, it's very important that the organization administrator checks those users just in case people might have moved on to different roles or functions. to make sure that those people are ascribed to the indicators and the topic indicators and topic approvers, that those people are still in place. That's it. And
I suppose just to add to that, from a NOAC perspective as well, it's certainly something NOAC has kind of emphasised in the circular and cover letter put out. When the guidelines first went out, that it does need an update of the current data coordinators to ensure that list is current and up to date. We have found on occasion that when we contact data coordinators, we find that they may have moved on, and that's understandable. So it's just worthwhile getting an update list every year to make sure that NOAC and the LGMA are in touch with the right people. Just to emphasise that point. Thank you. And I suppose the other thing then is there's one question, and maybe I'll ask it more between Martina and maybe Colin. It's a bit of maybe a tricky question, but some local authorities, it's from Anne Rizzo. Some local authorities make it a requirement for community groups to be a member of their local PPN if they want to be eligible for funding through the local authority. How does NOAC take this into account when comparing counties who do and don't take this approach? Or is it something NOAC takes account of at all? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, John. And it's an interesting question and a very straightforward answer. NOAC doesn't take account of the policy that's decided internally within the local authority in terms of how they treat PPN. We simply gather and publish the data that's presented to us. I suppose NOAC has been very conscious from the outset that our role is to scrutinise performance and not tell people what to do. And in that regard, I suppose it's a matter for local authorities to determine how they do things locally. And it's a matter for them to account for that in terms of the local interaction if they get questions about it, or indeed if NOAC questions it, but it's not for us to tell a local authority how to manage their PPN or indeed anything else.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that indeed. I just one or two other questions, and then we'll try and wrap it up in a second. So if anybody has any last minute questions to ask, fire them in quick through the chat room, and we'll try and deal with them there. Now, I suppose one question I have here is about the LG return system. And maybe it's a question for Patrick and for Bernie. Is you probably have gone through it in the presentation, but what would be the biggest issue you see with this system in terms of users, or what's the one thing you would guard people against? And you have mentioned training, and maybe you just might set out in terms of how you'll follow up with that, or and just to, I suppose, in terms of support for local authorities in terms of using the system over the coming few months. Thanks very much.
And Pat will take that one, yeah.
No problem. In the coming weeks, myself and, as I mentioned, Chelsea Arton have prepared just a training module that reflects queries that we've got over the years in regard to LG returns, like setting up new users, issuing return report requests or audit requests, and that's just to guide you through the steps. As I mentioned in the presentation, the help guide function on the LG return system is really, really helpful, and it gives really clear indications of how to generate any queries or issues that you may have in that regard. Other than that, I can't really think of any issues that may arise, but if they do, feel free to contact us on research@lgma.ie, and we deal with those queries directly and respond.
All right. Is there anything further you wish to add to that, or I'll leave that alone? Thank you. I suppose I've just one other question. One question for yourself, Colin, and perhaps maybe Martina, is just the validation process. When would you expect that to happen, and how would it work? Or I mean, it happened remotely last year. What's the expectations for this year? Thank you.
I'm happy enough to take that, John. And I suppose our expectation is that we'll carry it out in May. And that's in terms of the validation visits. And I suppose we'll be very conscious of where we are in the COVID cycle. I'm not terribly optimistic that we'll see people face to face in terms of sitting in the same room as them, but we managed to do it online last year with 6 local authorities. It wasn't ideal, but it worked and it gave us enough to go on. And I suppose I'm conscious also a lot of the Controller and Auditor General and local government auditors and so on, a lot of their work is being done online now as well. So, and a lot indeed of the private sector companies are doing their auditing online. So given where we're at, I think we'll be doing it online, and I think we'll be doing it in the month of May. So we'll be in touch with the individual local authorities that we're going to visit later on, nearer to that time.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I have 2 further questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to take those, and I'm going to try and stop at that stage. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to send them in. I think it's been a good workshop so far. We've had 119, 120 attendees, and we're still well over 100 in terms of people there. So that's actually great and appreciated that people are staying on. One question from a Catherine Kelly. And it's in relation to the trend analysis, and maybe I'll ask yourself, Martina, and then Bernie to take it in turn. Will there be an opportunity input trends for 2014 to 2019? This trend to be skewed with regard to the boundary expansion with Cork, which will require notes/comments. Do you want to take that first, Martina, and then maybe Bernie? You're doing another report. We'll ask yourself then to respond
I think that's more of a question for Bernie in the context of the report the LGMA are putting together. Our trend analysis for that was done in last year's report. So.
Okay,
thanks,
Bernie.
Martina. Yeah, we've already taken account of it. We footnoted the fact that actually that the boundary change took place, but the emphasis in our report, our trend report, while we do report on change in trend in terms of output and increased efficiencies and so on, one of the primary purposes of our input really is to look at the whole methodology and about consistency across indicators, and about, well, indicators change, the way it breaks a trend and so on. So we're really coming very much from a methodological perspective. That's the main learning really that we're trying to gain from our report. When NOAC report annually now, particularly this year was the first year where they started doing quite a lot of trend analysis. So we actually carry out the trend analysis and pass it on to NOAC, and they do the comment on it in their report. Like I say, our report will be a pulling it all together, a once-off kind of activity, and it's really focusing on the methodological issues, and we're really advocating for consistency across indicators as much as possible, just to show how we can only take trends so far if we keep chopping and changing indicators. So that's our real emphasis. We're more really about methodology rather than the outcomes per se, but it is NOAC that will actually comment on that in their annual reports, and it was noted and taken account of last year, and it will be next year.
Okay. I've one other question here, and it's probably a bit technical, so I'm not sure if it's possible to answer, but I'll read it out anyway. Is how should local authority housing reserved as COVID-19 self-isolation units for vulnerable groups be accounted for? Are they accounted or excluded? And would they be treated the same as local authority units reserved for emergency accommodation? Maybe a bit of a technical question. I don't know if anybody wants to take that, or is that something we should take offline and maybe respond back in time?
Yeah, I'll give a kind of an immediate response to it, John. I suppose we're very careful to include all social housing in our numbers, and very keen that we hold on to that because it's used as a baseline for the calculation of other indicators. So my sense is that the answer is to include them, but to put a note in the notes saying we had 10 houses or 20 houses or whatever it is reserved for COVID isolation. And that will allow us to reflect it in our report. But I would be very anxious that we'd hold on to the baseline data on what the total housing stock is.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've got one more question since, and I'll stop at that stage. From Anand Kiernan, in relation to C1, the total number of whole-time equivalents, guidance notes mention it comes from the figures provided to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage in the local authority quarterly returns. But Patrick's presentation mentions it comes from an external database. Can I have clarification, please? I don't know if you can answer that, Patrick, or is that probably something ourselves might need to answer that?
No, it's from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. It's just that it's reflected as an external data set because we obtain the data from the Department of Housing rather than through the LG return system. So it's similar to the EPA and other data sets I mentioned. We receive it in a similar fashion rather than local authorities directly inputting it into the LG return system. If that makes sense.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that. And I'm conscious of the time. One more question we've got, so I'll just take a quick. Another question is Limerick includes the operation of the HAPS in its revenue account. Should the operation of a shared service centre be excluded to allow comparatives? Colin, do you want to try and take that one there?
Okay, well, if this is under the context of the finance section, we do have the M1H, which asks that Limerick, Laois and Dublin City put aside what they spend on shared service under their revenue account. So M1G is the revenue itself, and then M1H is the revenue minus shared services. So I think that kind of identifies what you're paying for the HAP shared service, and that was the intent of adding that sub-indicator last year.
All right, thank you. Is anybody else anything to add to that? And that's the end of the questions, unless somebody else has something else to add.
Yeah, I think Colin touched on it there. Essentially, I suppose we're very conscious, not every shared service is of a national scale, but the ones that are particularly can skew the figures we deemed were the Dublin Homeless Executive that I think Bernie will be well familiar with, the shared payroll system in Laois and the HAP system in Limerick. So that's why we introduced the new indicator, which took out those specific areas of expenditure so that comparative analysis would be better.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now it's 12:30. I propose not to take any further questions, if that's okay. But if you wish to send them in, please do. We've left email addresses. We'll gladly take them in. We'll collate what has been logged here and try and do them up as a Q&A along with any other further questions that arise, and we'll keep that up to date as a help to yourselves and local authorities. Now, just to say a couple of things. The material from today has been recorded. So that, along with the recordings and the actual presentations themselves and the guidance, will all be posted onto the NOAC website shortly, along with the Q&A. So it's something to keep an eye out for. When that happens, we'll send a message out to delegates and to the data coordinators to let yourselves know and local authorities. So it just goes without further ado to express my thanks to the speakers, Martina Maloney, Colin Flood, Patrick Malone, and the panelists, which is Bernie Maloney or Bernie O'Donoghue, Hines, thank you. And just to express my thanks to you all and the effort today and this morning, which I thought it worked very well from our perspective. I hope it did for yourselves as delegates. And I just ask yourselves, if you can, to express your thanks to everybody today and to wish you all safe, safe time. Thank you very much.